Under the merciless Arizona sun of 1883, Sarah Caldwell's calloused hands bled as she hoisted another beam into place. Widowed and alone, she had promised her dying husband she would build a church where there was none. The townsfolk called her mad. A woman building a house of God, alone in Apache territory. Each plank she raised was met with whispers, impossible, foolish, blasphemous. But Sarah continued, day after day, her determination unwavering despite her dwindling supplies and strength. From high atop the canyon ridge, Náshdí watched. The Apache warrior had seen many white settlers come and go, but never one with such spirit. What would happen when these two worlds, divided by blood and history, finally collided? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The small wooden box contained all that remained of Robert Caldwell. Sarah's fingers traced the worn edges of his pocket Bible, its leather cover stained with desert dust, and near the spine, the unmistakable rusty mark of blood. The bullet had passed through the scripture before finding her husband's heart. A cruel irony that the word of God had failed to stop the fever that took him, just as it had failed to stop the bullet that nearly had, years earlier during his service in the Union Army. I promised you, Robert, she whispered, opening the Bible to where their marriage certificate was pressed between the pages of Ecclesiastes. Though perhaps I was the fool, 3 months had passed since she'd laid him in the hard Arizona earth. 3 months of waking alone, of forcing herself to eat, of learning to make her soft hands do a man's work. The homestead they'd built together felt hollow without him. Their dream of a little white church on the hill remained just that, a dream, but yesterday, something had shifted. Sarah had discovered Robert's carpentry tools in the shed and found herself running her fingers along the handles, remembering how his hands had held them. Then, without fully understanding why, she had picked up his hammer and walked to the hill where they had planned to build. The land was waiting for her, just as it had been when they'd first arrived from Boston 5 years earlier. Robert, the third son of a shipping magnate, had shocked his family by marrying the headstrong daughter of a professor and heading west to become a missionary. Sarah had been equally determined to escape the suffocating propriety of Boston society. We'll build something that matters, he had told her. Not just a church building, but a community with faith at its center. They had lived in a tent while building their modest home, planning to start the church once they were settled, but the harsh realities of frontier life had intervened, drought years, illness, and the constant work of survival. The church plans had been drawn but never realized. Sarah placed the Bible carefully back in its box. The previous day, she had hammered a single post into the ground atop the hill, one post, marking the corner of what would become the altar. It had taken her hours, with blistered hands and aching shoulders unused to such labor. But when the post finally stood firm, something like peace had settled over her for the first time since Robert's death. "Mrs. Caldwell, you can't possibly be serious about this," Thomas Miller had said when she'd visited his general store that morning to purchase building supplies. The shopkeeper's kind eyes had creased with concern. "A woman alone can't build a church, and yet that appears to be what I'm doing," Sarah had replied, sliding her list across the counter. She'd spent the night copying Robert's plans, modifying them for a smaller structure she might actually complete. Thomas had studied the list, shaking his head. "Even if I extend you credit, which I'm willing to do out of respect for your late husband, this is madness. There are men in town who could be hired. With what money?" Sarah had interrupted. "The last of our savings went to the doctor who failed to save Robert. I have my hands, I have his tools, and I have time." Thomas hadn't argued further, but his expression had been clear. He thought grief had unhinged her mind. Perhaps it had. But as Sarah gathered Robert's tools and loaded them into their old wagon, she felt more clarity than she had in months. The task was impossible. She knew that. She had basic knowledge of carpentry from watching Robert, but nothing that qualified her to build an entire structure. She would likely fail. Yet the alternative to remain in the homestead, slowly withering away like so many widow women she had known, seemed far worse than failure. The morning sun was barely cresting the horizon when Sarah began her routine the next day. Prayer first, kneeling beside her bed as she had each day since childhood, then a simple breakfast of cornbread and coffee. She dressed in Robert's old work clothes, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs, tying them with twine to keep them from hindering her movement. At the building site she unfolded his plans and weighted them with stones. The foundation needed to be laid first, stones gathered from the nearby hills, fitted together with mortar. It would take weeks just to prepare the ground and gather enough stones. One day at a time, she reminded herself, echoing Robert's favorite saying, "The Lord only asks us to take one step, then another." By midday, her back screamed with pain as she dug the outline of the foundation. Her hands, once soft from a genteel Boston upbringing, were developing calluses that would soon match her husband's. Each shovelful of earth was a prayer, each pain a reminder she was still alive. She didn't notice the silhouette watching from the distant ridge, a solitary figure on horseback, motionless against the cloudless sky. Redemption had not been anyone's first choice of destination. The town had sprung up alongside a trading post, where the stage line met a creek that ran most of the year. It was a patchwork of humanity: failed miners, restless farmers, second-chance seekers, and those running from something or someone back east. The name had been chosen with more hope than accuracy. Saturday was market day, and Sarah steered her wagon carefully down the rutted main street. She needed more nails, and her dwindling funds meant each purchase required careful planning. The general store's bell jingled as she entered, and Thomas Miller looked up from his ledger. "Mrs. Caldwell," he greeted her with a polite nod. "How goes your project?" Before she could answer, Marshal Jenkins stepped from behind a shelf of canned goods. As the town's self-appointed leader and owner of the largest cattle operation in the county, Jenkins commanded a certain deference. "So it's true," he said, eyeing Sarah's dust-covered men's clothing with undisguised disapproval. "Thomas here thought you'd come to your senses by now." Sarah straightened her spine. "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Miller, I need 2 pounds of nails, please." Jenkins wasn't deterred. A woman hammering away like a common laborer. It's unnatural and dangerous out there alone with Apache devils prowling these hills. The store had grown quiet as other customers paused to listen. Sarah felt their eyes on her, some curious, others judgmental. "The church will serve everyone in this valley," she replied evenly, "including our Apache neighbors, should they choose to enter." A woman gasped. Jenkins' face darkened. "Those savages burned my cousin's homestead last spring. 3 good Christian souls sent to their maker. Wasn't that raid in response to the militia attack on their camp?" Sarah countered, immediately regretting the words. She needed these people's goodwill, not their animosity. Jenkins stepped closer. "You'd do well to remember which side you're on, Mrs. Caldwell. Your husband understood the realities of frontier life. My husband believed in building bridges, not burning them," Sarah said, turning back to Thomas. "The nails, please." Thomas hurriedly weighed out the nails, sliding them into a paper sack. "I've added some extra at no charge," he murmured, too low for Jenkins to hear. "And there's a can of beans. You're looking thin." Sarah nodded gratefully, opening her coin purse to pay. Thomas pushed her hand away gently. "Add it to your account. Robert would haunt me if I let his widow go hungry." "I can pay my way," Sarah insisted, placing coins on the counter. Save it for what you can't grow or make, Thomas advised, sliding the coins back. And Sarah, be careful, not everyone's as understanding as me about your church. As if to illustrate his point, the Reverend William Parker entered the store, his tall frame stooping slightly under the doorway. The Presbyterian minister served the town from a rented room above the saloon, conducting services whenever enough people gathered to warrant one. Mrs. Caldwell, he acknowledged with a nod. I heard about your endeavor. Perhaps we might discuss it after tomorrow's service. I won't be attending tomorrow, Sarah replied. Too much work to do. The minister's expression tightened. A day of rest is commanded by the Lord, Mrs. Caldwell, as is caring for widows and orphans, yet I notice the collection plate rarely comes my way, Sarah responded, immediately regretting her sharpness. The grief had left an edge to her that hadn't been there before. What you're attempting, Reverend Parker said carefully, might be seen as questioning the established church. A woman, building and potentially preaching. I'm building a place of worship, not claiming to preach, Sarah interrupted. A simple church for those who can't make it to town, nothing more. And who will minister there? He pressed. Whoever feels called to do so, Sarah answered, gathering her purchases. God's house belongs to all his children. As she left the store, she could hear the whispers beginning. The general store ledger would record more than her purchases today. In its margins, Thomas would later note the growing concerns about the mad widow on the hill. The drought had worsened that summer. Dust clung to everything, and the creek had narrowed to a trickle. Farmers watched the cloudless sky with increasing desperation, and tempers shortened with each rainless day. Sarah felt the town's mood darkening as she drove her wagon back toward her homestead. The hill where she worked stood starkly against the horizon, her single corner post visible from the road. Some days, it felt like a declaration of faith. Other days, it seemed like a monument to her foolishness. One more day, Lord, she whispered as she urged the horse forward. Give me strength for one more day. As the town receded behind her, she did not notice the figure on horseback circling wide to follow her progress from a distance, moving like a shadow along the ridgeline. The eagle feather hung from a leather cord around Náshdí's neck, a talisman connecting him to the Creator and the natural world. He had received it during his vision quest as a young man, when the great bird had circled above him for 3 days while he fasted on the mountain. In his vision, the eagle had led him to a place where waters met and people of different paths gathered. For years he had wondered what this vision meant. Now, as he watched the white woman working alone on the distant hill, he wondered if his vision's meaning was finally revealing itself. Náshdí had been born in the time when his people still moved freely across their ancestral lands. His name, meaning he who guides, had been given after he had led a lost hunting party back to camp during a snowstorm when he was only 7 winters old. As a young man, he had been groomed to become a spiritual leader, trained in the old ways by his grandfather. But the world had changed rapidly. White soldiers came with their forts and guns, treaties were made and broken. His grandfather had counseled peace when possible, resistance when necessary. We must be like the water, he had told Náshdí, sometimes flowing around obstacles, sometimes wearing them down slowly, sometimes crashing against them with force. Náshdí had married and fathered 2 children. They had lived in the traditional way, following seasonal patterns until the reservation system disrupted everything. During conflicts with settlers 5 winters ago, his wife and children had been killed when soldiers attacked their camp without warning. After burying his family, Náshdí had withdrawn from his tribe, spending months alone in the high country, fasting and seeking guidance. When he returned, he was changed. Quieter, more solitary, but with a deeper spiritual presence that others recognized. He had become a respected voice in council meetings, but also spent long periods alone, observing the changing world around them. The drought had been hard on his people. Traditional water sources were drying up, and many were being forced closer to the reservation boundaries where the white Indian agents controlled access to food and supplies. Those who resisted were labeled hostile and hunted by soldiers. For weeks now, Náshdí had been drawn to this area. Guided by dreams he didn't fully understand, he had made camp in a hidden canyon, watching the settlement in the distance and the solitary figure working on the hill. The eagle had appeared 3 days ago, circling high above the woman's building site. Náshdí had followed its flight, remembering his vision quest. When the eagle had landed on a dead pine overlooking the woman's work, Náshdí had taken it as a sign. Now he sat on his pinto horse, observing her methodical labor from a safe distance. She worked like someone much stronger, stubbornly continuing when her body clearly wanted to quit. Each morning she would kneel before beginning, her lips moving in what he recognized as prayer. Different words, different gestures, but the same reverence he showed to the Creator. The structure taking shape was clearly a white man's church. Náshdí had seen such buildings in the settlements, but this woman built alone without men helping, which was strange to him. Among his people, important structures were community efforts, with each person contributing according to their skills. Her determination intrigued him. She was not young, perhaps 35 winters, and her body was not made for such labor. Yet she persisted day after day, her progress slow but steady. She spoke aloud sometimes as she worked, as if conversing with someone invisible. "She speaks to spirits," he murmured to his horse, whose ears flicked back at his voice. From conversations overheard in his cautious observations of the town, he had learned she was a widow named Sarah Caldwell. The settlers thought her mad with grief. Some mocked her, others avoided her as if her strangeness might be catching. Náshdí understood grief's power to change a person. After his family's death, he too had done things others considered strange, sitting motionless for days, refusing food, speaking to the wind. Grief walked its own path. Today she struggled with a large beam, trying to lift it into place. Her face reddened with effort, and even from this distance he could see her arms trembling. When she finally gave up, sinking to her knees beside the beam, he felt an unexpected urge to help her. The thought startled him. White settlers had brought nothing but suffering to his people. Their churches taught that his spiritual ways were evil. Their God was said to favor them above all others, justifying their taking of land and lives. Yet as he watched her wipe sweat from her brow, and stubbornly try again with the beam, something resonated within him. Her struggle seemed pure somehow, untainted by the arrogance he'd seen in other white faces. The eagle appeared again, soaring above the construction site. It circled 3 times, then flew directly over Náshdí's position, before disappearing into the canyon behind him. He touched the feather at his neck, considering the sign. Perhaps it was time to approach closer, to understand what drew him to this woman's solitary mission. Perhaps she was part of the gathering place from his vision. Tomorrow, he told his horse, turning back toward his hidden camp. Tomorrow we will see what the Creator intends. The water barrel cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Sarah watched in dismay as precious water seeped into the thirsty ground, the liquid disappearing almost instantly into the parched earth. She had been careless, letting the empty barrel fall from the wagon at an awkward angle. "No, no, no," she muttered frantically, trying to right the barrel. But the damage was done. A jagged split ran the length of the wooden staves, rendering it useless. Without water, she couldn't continue working in the relentless heat. The creek that ran near her property had dwindled to a series of stagnant pools, and the nearest reliable water source was back in town, a journey that would cost her half a day's work.
Sarah sat heavily on a pile of lumber, head in her hands. "Lord, I don't ask for much," she whispered, "but I need water to do your work." The sun beat down mercilessly. Sarah had been working since dawn, and it was now well past midday. She had managed to set 2 more support posts, and was preparing to connect them with crossbeams when the accident occurred. Progress was painfully slow, but it was progress nonetheless. She uncorked her canteen and took a careful sip, rationing the remaining water. The liquid was warm and tasted of the metal container, but it was wet. Perhaps she could finish the crossbeam, then head back to town for water tomorrow. Standing, Sarah felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The world tilted alarmingly, and she reached out to steady herself against a post. Her hand missed, and she stumbled forward, the canteen falling from her grasp, the precious remaining water soaked into the dirt. Foolish, she scolded herself, kneeling to retrieve the empty canteen. The movement sent another wave of dizziness through her. How long had it been since she'd eaten? The morning's cornbread seemed a distant memory. Sarah tried to stand but found her legs uncooperative. The heat pressed down like a physical weight. Dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. She should find shade, she knew, but the nearest tree was 20 yards away, and her body refused to move. Just rest a moment, she told herself, easing down to sit on the ground. The half-built church swam before her eyes. Robert would be disappointed in her carelessness. One had to respect the desert, he'd always said. One had to prepare. When Sarah opened her eyes again, the sun had shifted position. She'd lost time. Her mouth felt stuffed with cotton, her lips cracked and painful. She needed water immediately. With trembling arms, she pushed herself to her hands and knees, then gradually to her feet. The world spun. She took one faltering step, then another, aiming for the distant tree. It seemed to recede with each step she took. Sarah didn't feel herself fall. One moment she was walking, the next she was staring at the sky, unable to move. The blue expanse above her was untroubled by clouds, beautiful and indifferent to her plight. "Robert," she whispered, though her husband was long beyond hearing. "I tried." A shadow fell across her face. Sarah blinked, trying to clear her vision. A figure stood above her, haloed by the sun. For a wild moment, she thought it was an angel come to carry her to Robert. Then her vision cleared, and she saw a man with copper skin and long black hair pulled back with a strip of leather. An Apache. Fear shot through her, momentarily overriding her exhaustion. Sarah tried to scramble away, but her limbs refused to cooperate. Stories of Apache raids flickered through her mind, tales told in hushed voices around town fires. But this man carried no weapon she could see. Instead, he held out a water skin. When she didn't take it, he knelt beside her and gently lifted her head, bringing the water skin to her lips. The first splash of water on her parched tongue triggered a desperate thirst. She gulped greedily until he pulled the skin away, shaking his head. "Slow," he said in accented English. "Too much, you sick." Sarah stared at him in wonder. Close up, she could see he was perhaps 40, with lines around his eyes suggesting both laughter and hardship. An eagle feather hung from a cord around his neck, and he wore a mix of traditional clothing and items clearly obtained from white traders. "Who?" she managed to croak. "Náshdí," he replied, tapping his chest. "You, Sarah." It wasn't a question. He helped her to sit up, allowing her more careful sips of water. Sarah's mind raced. How did he know her name? Why was he helping her? Thank you, she said when she could speak properly. I was foolish. Náshdí nodded, looking at the broken barrel. Water gone. Bad. He pointed to the cloudless sky. No rain long time. He helped her to stand, supporting her when she swayed. Sarah's legs felt like rubber, and her head still spun, but the water had revived her somewhat. She noticed his horse grazing nearby, a pinto with distinctive black and white patches. You need more water, Náshdí said. Come. He gestured toward a stand of rocks in the distance. Sarah hesitated. Following an Apache man into the wilderness went against everything she'd been told since arriving in the territory. Yet he had saved her life when he could have easily taken it. Or worse, according to the tales whispered in town. Náshdí seemed to sense her fear. He stepped back, giving her space. Water there, he said, pointing again to the rocks. Good water. Hidden. Decision made. Sarah nodded. Lead the way. As they walked slowly toward the rocks, Sarah stealing glances at her unexpected savior. She did not see the rider on the distant road, who had stopped to watch them through a brass spyglass before spurring his horse toward town. The hidden spring bubbled from a cleft in the rocks, creating a small pool before disappearing underground again. Sarah had passed within 100 yards of this spot countless times without ever suspecting water lay so close. Náshdí had shown her how to spot the signs. A certain type of scrub brush that only grew near water. The occasional tracks of animals converging in this direction. Many not see, he explained as she drank deeply from the cool, clear pool. Water hides, smart. In the days that followed her collapse, Sarah expected Náshdí to disappear back into the wilderness. Instead, he began appearing at the building site, watching from a respectful distance as she worked. At first, his presence unnerved her, but gradually she grew accustomed to his silent observation. On the fourth day, when she struggled again with a heavy crossbeam, he approached without a word, and took the other end. Together they lifted it into place. Sarah handed him a nail and Robert's hammer. He studied the tool with interest before driving the nail with 3 precise strikes. No words were exchanged, but something shifted between them. The next morning, he was waiting when she arrived at the site. He had fashioned a new water barrel from materials she didn't recognize. Some kind of treated animal hide stretched over a wooden frame. Not break, he assured her, demonstrating its flexibility. Their communication was limited by language, but they developed a system of gestures and simple words. Sarah would point and name tools or building materials in English. Náshdí would respond with the Apache word. By the end of the week, they had a small shared vocabulary.
The work progressed more rapidly with his help. Náshdí was stronger than his lean frame suggested, and he had an intuitive understanding of construction that surprised her. When she showed him Robert's plans, he studied them carefully before suggesting, through gestures and broken English, alterations that would make the structure more stable in the desert winds. One midday, as they sat in the shade eating the simple meal Sarah had brought, cornbread and dried apples, Náshdí ran his hand along a piece of lumber, frowning. "Bad cut," he said, pointing to where the saw had torn the grain rather than cutting cleanly. "Wood angry." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "The wood is angry?" Náshdí nodded seriously. "All things have spirit. Wood was tree. Tree had life." He mimicked the motion of a respectful cut, his hand moving with the grain rather than against it. "Honor the wood. It holds up church." Sarah considered this. Robert had been meticulous about his carpentry, treating materials with care and precision. He would have understood Náshdí's perspective, she thought. "Show me," she said. That afternoon, Náshdí taught her to work with the wood rather than forcing it. How to read the grain, how to let the natural strength of the material guide the construction. His hands moved over hers, adjusting her grip on the saw, showing her how to feel the resistance and adjust accordingly. As the sun began to set, they stepped back to admire their progress. A wooden crossbeam now connected two main posts, the first horizontal element of the structure. Sarah felt a surge of accomplishment, seeing the church taking tangible form. "Thank you," she said, turning to Náshdí. "I couldn't have lifted that alone." He nodded, touching the eagle feather at his neck. "You build for your God. I help. Good work." "Would you like to know about my God?" Sarah asked hesitantly. Náshdí considered her question. "Many gods? Maybe same God, different names. I listen." As they gathered their tools, Sarah told him about Jesus and his teachings of love and acceptance. Náshdí listened without comment, occasionally asking for clarification of a word. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "Your Jesus say love all people?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "All people are God's children. Town people know this." There was no accusation in his tone, merely curiosity. Sarah sighed. "They know, but sometimes people forget what they know, or they find reasons to make exceptions." Náshdí seemed to accept this explanation. "Tomorrow I bring food. You too thin." The next day he brought rabbit stew in a clay pot, the meat tender and flavored with unfamiliar herbs. They ate together, and Sarah found herself sharing stories of Boston and her journey west. Náshdí spoke of his childhood, running free in mountains now claimed by white settlers. Neither mentioned the conflicts between their peoples, though the knowledge hung in the air between them. When a sudden dust devil swept through the building site, scattering loose papers, Náshdí laughed, the first time Sarah had heard the sound. His face transformed, years dropping away. "Wind spirit plays tricks," he explained, helping her retrieve Robert's plans. As they reached for the same paper, their hands touched briefly. Sarah felt a strange flutter in her chest, an awareness she hadn't experienced since Robert's courtship. Confused by her reaction, she withdrew her hand quickly, focusing intently on securing the papers. Náshdí seemed not to notice, but when she glanced up, his dark eyes were watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Tomorrow?" he asked as they prepared to leave. "Tomorrow," Sarah confirmed, surprised by how much she looked forward to it. Sarah discovered the note nailed to her door at dawn. The rough paper fluttered in the morning breeze, secured by a rusted nail driven deep into the wood. She tore it free, the nail leaving a scar in the doorframe that matched the sudden chill in her heart as she read the crude message. "No Injun lovers in redemption. Stop or burn." The handwriting was disguised, letters formed awkwardly as if written by someone's non-dominant hand. Sarah crumpled the paper, then thought better of it and smoothed it out again, tucking it into her pocket. Evidence, though of what crime she wasn't sure, the threat against her or her supposed transgression. She had known this was coming. 2 days ago, she had noticed a rider watching from the road. Yesterday, Thomas had been uncharacteristically terse when she'd visited the store, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "People are talking, Sarah," he'd said quietly as he filled her order. "Be careful." Now, as she hitched her horse to the wagon, Sarah wondered who had left the note. Marshall Jenkins was the obvious suspect, but it could have been anyone in town. Fear bred hatred, and Drought made everyone afraid. The church was taking shape. 4 walls now stood partially framed, the skeleton of a simple rectangular building outlined against the sky. With Náshdí's help, what would have taken her months might be completed before winter. He was waiting at the site when she arrived, already lifting a beam into place. He turned at the sound of her wagon, his expression brightening momentarily before clouding with concern. "Bad news," he said, not a question but a reading of her face. Sarah handed him the note. Náshdí studied it, his expression unreadable. "You know these words?" she asked, unsure if he could read English. Enough. He handed the paper back. Town people angry. Some of them, not all. Sarah began unloading tools from her wagon. They're afraid of what they don't understand. I go, Náshdí said simply. Finish alone, safer. No. Sarah's response came quickly, surprising them both with its vehemence. This church is for everyone. If they can't accept that, then they're the ones who don't belong here, not you. Náshdí studied her face, seeming to weigh her determination. Finally he nodded once. Your choice. Dangerous. They worked in silence that morning, the note casting a shadow over their usual comfortable rhythm. Around midday, the sound of approaching horses broke the quiet. Náshdí melted away so quickly, Sarah barely saw him go, disappearing behind the half-built church and into the scrub beyond. 3 riders approached, Marshal Jenkins flanked by 2 men, Sarah recognized as hands from his ranch. They stopped a few yards away, Jenkins surveying the construction with exaggerated interest. Making progress, I see, he called. Remarkable what a woman can accomplish. Almost as if you had help. Sarah set down her hammer. Was there something you needed, Mr. Jenkins? Jenkins dismounted, leaving his men on horseback. Just being neighborly, Mrs. Caldwell, checking on the widow woman, as Christian charity demands. His gaze swept the sight. Seems like you've had some assistance. I believe in prayer, Mr. Jenkins. The Lord provides strength where needed. Jenkins snorted. Does the Lord have copper skin and wear feathers? Because that's what Silas Hawkins saw 2 days ago. You working alongside an Apache buck. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Anyone willing to help build God's house is welcome. This isn't about God's house. Jenkins spat. This is about you betraying your own kind. That savage's people killed good men and women. They've attacked homesteads, stolen livestock. And how many of their people have been killed? Sarah counted. How many pushed from their lands? The man helping me has done none of those things. He's shown more Christian charity than many who sit in church on Sundays. Jenkins stepped closer. You're a widow woman living alone. People might start wondering if your relationship with this savage is inappropriate. Heat flashed through Sarah. Anger, not shame. My relationship with him is none of your concern. It becomes the town's concern when you invite danger to our doorstep. Jenkins growled. What's to stop him bringing his whole tribe down on us once he knows our defenses? He doesn't want trouble. Neither do I. Then send him away. Jenkins gestured to the church. Finish this foolishness alone, or better yet give it up entirely. Come into town where decent folks can look after you properly. This is my home. This is my calling, Sarah said firmly. I won't abandon either. Jenkins studied her, then shook his head. The Reverend Parker is holding a special service tomorrow night, praying for rain, praying for protection against Indian troubles. You might want to attend, show where your loyalties lie. My loyalty is to God, Mr. Jenkins, not to you, not to Reverend Parker, not to anyone's idea of what's proper. That's your final word. It is. Jenkins remounted his horse. You've been warned, Mrs. Caldwell. What happens next is on your head. He turned his horse, then paused. Oh, and you might want to check your property line. I believe that church sits mighty close to contested grazing land. After they rode away, Náshdí reappeared silently. They threaten, he observed. Yes, Sarah picked up her hammer again, needing the solid weight in her hand. I still go, build at night. No one see. Sarah shook her head. If we hide, they win. This church stands for something, Náshdí, something bigger than their fear. Your people kill for less, he said softly. They're not all my people, Sarah replied, surprising herself with the realization that she meant it. Not anymore. That evening as they finished work, Náshdí paused before mounting his horse. Be careful. I watch your house tonight. You don't need to. I watch, he repeated firmly. Sleep now. Tomorrow we build more. As Sarah drove home, she felt a curious mixture of fear and peace. The threat was real, but so was her conviction, and she was no longer alone in it. The small pouch Náshdí presented to Sarah contained an unusual combination of objects: a simple wooden rosary with smooth worn beads alongside a bundle of dried sage cedar and other herbs bound with sinew. He had fashioned it while watching her property through the night, his fingers working by touch in the darkness. Protection, he explained, placing it in her palm, both ways. Sarah examined the dual blessing bundle with curious fingers. Where did you get the rosary? Trade long ago. Catholic priest, teach some Apache. I keep, he gestured to the herbs, these from my people, together strong medicine. It was Sunday morning. Sarah had not gone to town for services, partly from defiance and partly from fear of confrontation. Instead, she sat on a newly constructed bench inside the partial walls of her church, Robert's Bible open on her lap. Náshdí had appeared silently as she read, bearing his gift. Would you like to hear some words from my sacred book? She asked, making room for him on the bench. Náshdí nodded, settling beside her. His shoulder nearly touched hers, and Sarah was acutely aware of his presence, the scent of sage and pine that clung to him, the quiet rhythm of his breathing. She read from the Sermon on the Mount, her voice gaining strength as the familiar words filled the unfinished space. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Náshdí listened attentively. When she finished, he asked, peace good, but how make peace when others want war? Sarah had no simple answer. Sometimes it begins with one person refusing to hate, she said finally. One person seeing the humanity in another. Like you see me, Náshdí observed. Yes, Sarah admitted, though it took me time. Náshdí nodded, accepting her honesty. Now I tell you story of my people. He spoke of the creation as his tribe understood it, how first man and first woman emerged into this world, how the animals and plants were given as relatives to the human people, how the Creator gave different gifts to different tribes. We not say our way, only way, he explained. Many paths to Creator, like many trails to same water. Sarah considered this. It differed from what she'd been taught, that there was but one path to salvation, yet she couldn't deny the wisdom and reverence in Náshdí's words, nor the genuine spiritual connection he demonstrated. Your Jesus, Náshdí continued, he sounds like wise shaman. He see beyond small thinking. He heal, he teach, he know spirits. That's an interesting way to think of him. Sarah said carefully. You not like? Náshdí asked, watching her face. It's not that, it's just different from how I was taught to think of him. Náshdí smiled slightly. Different, not always wrong. They sat in contemplative silence, the sun warming the new wooden beams around them. Birds called from nearby mesquite, and a gentle breeze stirred the dust. I want to bless this place, Náshdí said suddenly. Apache way, good spirit for new building. Sarah hesitated only briefly. I would be honored. He instructed her to gather stones to form a small circle in what would become the church's center. Then he produced a small leather pouch of cornmeal, creating a pattern on the ground that resembled a cross but with additional elements, a circle encompassing it, and lines extending in 4 directions. 4 directions, he explained, pointing. East, sun rises, new beginnings. South, growing time, youth. West, reflection, maturity. North, wisdom, ancestors. He pointed to the circle, all connected, all one. From another pouch he took a small amount of tobacco, sprinkling it over the pattern, while singing softly in his native tongue. The melody was haunting, rising and falling like wind through canyon walls. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, she felt their reverence. Náshdí gestured for her to kneel opposite him. He took her hands across the symbol, his calloused fingers warm against hers. Now you pray, he instructed, your words to your God. Sarah closed her eyes. Heavenly Father,
Bless this place that it may be a sanctuary for all your children. Let it stand as a testament to the truth, that in your eyes there are no divisions among people. Let all who enter here find peace, comfort, and acceptance. In Jesus' name, Amen. When she opened her eyes, Náshdí was watching her with an expression of gentle approval. Good prayer, no small thinking. He released her hands and stood, walking slowly around the interior of the partially built church, touching each major beam. At each one, he paused to whisper words she couldn't hear. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked. "Telling wood to be strong," he replied, reminding it was once tree reaching to sky, asking it to hold up house of prayer. When he completed the circuit, he returned to Sarah. "Now church, blessed 2 ways, double strong." They worked through the afternoon, raising another wall frame. The labor seemed lighter somehow, their movements more harmonious. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the site, Sarah realized they had accomplished more in one day than she had in a week working alone. "Your God help," Náshdí said, as if reading her thoughts. "My spirit's help, but mostly 2 people better than 1 alone." He reached into his shirt and removed the eagle feather from around his neck. With careful movements, he tied it to the highest beam they had placed. "Eagle watches now," he said. "Sees far, warns of danger." Sarah touched the dual blessing bundle in her pocket. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate for what she felt. Náshdí nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Tomorrow we bring roof closer to sky." The leather-bound journal had been a wedding gift from Sarah's father. Its early pages documented her journey west with Robert, hopes, dreams, observations of a young bride venturing into the unknown. After Robert's death, the entries had stopped abruptly. Now by lamplight, Sarah wrote again, her pen scratching softly across the paper. "I find myself questioning everything I once held certain. The church rising on the hill is not the one Robert and I planned. Its purpose has shifted, as perhaps have I." Náshdí speaks of the Creator in ways that should seem foreign, even blasphemous, yet I find truth in his words. Is God larger than the box we've placed him in? Would Jesus recognize himself in the exclusive faith that bears his name? Today Náshdí showed me how to listen to the wood, to work with its grain rather than imposing my will upon it. There is wisdom in this approach that extends beyond carpentry. Perhaps we've been trying to force God's creation into patterns of our making, rather than discerning the patterns he intended. I find myself watching Náshdí's hands as he works, strong, capable hands that move with purpose and grace. Sometimes I catch him watching me, when he thinks I'm not looking. What does he see? A foolish white woman, a friend, something more? And why does the possibility stir such confusion in me? Robert, forgive me these thoughts. Sarah closed the journal abruptly, troubled by the direction of her reflections. She tucked it beneath her pillow and extinguished the lamp, but sleep remained elusive. The next morning brought clouds that promised rain but delivered none, teasing the parched land before drifting away. The air hung heavy with unfulfilled potential as Sarah and Náshdí worked on fitting windows into the church walls. "Your hands bleed," Náshdí observed, noticing the reopened blisters on Sarah's palms. "They're toughening," she replied, wiping them on her apron. "Soon I'll have proper calluses." Náshdí shook his head and retrieved a small container from his satchel. "Medicine," he explained, opening it to reveal a greenish paste. "Give hands." Sarah hesitated before extending her palms. His touch was gentle as he applied the salve, which cooled her inflamed skin instantly. "Plant called, English name I not know, stops pain, helps healing." His fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary. "Hard work for woman alone. Why you do this?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She had asked herself the same thing many times in recent weeks. At first it was for Robert to fulfill his dream, to honor his memory. She flexed her fingers as Náshdí released them. Now, I'm not certain. Something changed. What changed? Sarah considered the question carefully. When I started, I thought I was building a monument to what I'd lost. Now I think perhaps I'm building something new, something that needs to exist. Náshdí nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Vision becomes clear while walking path. They resumed work, but Sarah's thoughts remained on his question. Why was she doing this? The church no longer represented just her faith, or Robert's memory. It had become something more complex, a bridge between worlds, a statement of defiance against those who would divide humanity into worthy and unworthy. As the afternoon progressed, Náshdí grew uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, as they sat in the shade drinking water, he spoke. I had family once, wife, son, daughter. His voice was measured, revealing little emotion, but Sarah could sense the depth beneath. Soldiers come, not ask questions, just shoot. Sarah's hand covered her mouth. Náshdí, I'm so sorry. He shrugged, a gesture that belied the pain in his eyes. 5 winters passed. I was hunting, came back to. He didn't finish the sentence. For long time, I want to kill all white eyes. Hate big, like fire inside. What changed? Sarah asked softly, echoing his earlier question. Time, visions, spirit journey. He looked directly at her. Then I see you, woman alone, building, strong spirit, like warrior but different fight. I'm no warrior, Sarah protested. Different kinds warriors. Some fight with weapons, some fight with stubborn hope. A rare smile crossed his face. You very stubborn. Sarah laughed despite the gravity of their conversation. Robert used to say the same thing. Your husband, Náshdí said. You loved much. Yes, the word caught in her throat. Good man, the best I've known. Sarah paused, then added, until recently. The implication hung in the air between them. Náshdí looked away, focusing on the distant mountains. Your people take much from my people, he said finally. Land lives, old ways, but cannot take here. He tapped his chest. Spirit remains free. Not all white people want to take. Sarah said softly. No, some different. He met her eyes again. Like you. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofs. Both tensed, but it was only Thomas from the general store, driving his wagon up the rough path to the building site. Sarah, he called, relief evident in his voice when he saw her. You're all right then? Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be? Thomas's eyes flickered to Náshdí, who had risen and moved slightly away, his stance watchful but not threatening. There was talk in town, Thomas said, lowering his voice though. Náshdí could surely still hear. After Jenkins' visit here, some men were drinking, talking about teaching you a lesson about Indian loving. I was worried they might come out here. And you came to warn me? Sarah asked, touched by his concern. Thomas nodded, still watching Náshdí warily. I've brought supplies too, things you ordered last week. He began unloading crates from his wagon. The Reverend spoke against violence in his sermon, but I'm not sure everyone was listening. Be careful, Sarah. Náshdí approached slowly, hands visible at his sides. You friend to Sarah. Thomas straightened, meeting the Apache's gaze with evident effort. I try to be. Known her and Robert since they came to these parts. Náshdí nodded once. Then you friend to me also. The simple declaration seemed to startle Thomas. He looked between them, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're really building this church together, he said wonderingly. It's not just what? Sarah prompted. Thomas shook his head. Nothing. People talk nonsense. He finished unloading the supplies. I should get back before dark. As he climbed onto his wagon he paused. Sarah, there's a town meeting tomorrow night, about the drought and other matters. You might want to attend. After Thomas departed, Náshdí helped Sarah store the supplies inside the partially completed church. More trouble comes, he observed. Yes, Sarah agreed, but so do allies, it seems. The cracked earth painting hung from a beam in the church, a stark canvas of red and brown pigments that Náshdí had created using natural materials, ochre, clay and plant dyes. The dried mud at the center was deliberately cracked, forming a pattern like a lightning bolt splitting the land. Around the edges, small figures of humans and animals huddled near dwindling blue patches representing water. Drought story, Náshdí explained as Sarah studied the artwork. When I child, elder make painting like this, teach about balance. The painting had appeared that morning, Náshdí arriving with it already completed. It was his response to the news Sarah had brought back from town the previous evening. The town meeting had been tense, the drought dominating everyone's concerns. Wells were running dry, crops withering in the fields, cattle were being sold at ruinous prices, or lost to thirst. Through it all ran an undercurrent of suspicion, sideways glances at Sarah as she sat at the back of the crowded meeting house. It's God's judgment, one farmer had declared, for those among us who've strayed from righteous ways. Marshal Jenkins had been quick to seize the opportunity. Strange, isn't it, how this drought worsened just as a certain widow began consorting with savages, building a mockery of a church where heathen rituals take place. Reverend Parker had tried to redirect the conversation. Natural phenomena are not punishments for individual sins, Mr. Jenkins. The rain falls on the just and unjust alike, or in this case doesn't fall on either. But the seed had been planted. By meeting's end, Sarah felt the weight of accusatory stares. Only Thomas and a few others had spoken to her as the crowd dispersed. They're scared, Thomas had told her quietly. Fear makes people irrational. Now looking at Náshdí's painting, Sarah recognized the truth it conveyed. Your people are suffering from the drought too. Náshdí nodded. Creek beds dry, game animals go far for water, hunger comes to reservation. Do your people believe the drought is punishment? Sarah asked. Some say balance broken between people and earth. Others say natural cycle will pass. He traced the lightning pattern in the center of the painting. Old ones teach, when drought comes people must come together, share water, share food. Instead your people and my people fight more. Sarah thought of the accusations at the town meeting. Some believe I've brought this upon them by working with you. Náshdí's expression remained calm, but Sarah had learned to read the subtle tightening around his eyes that indicated concern. Old hatred finds new reasons, he said simply. They worked through the morning, raising roof beams with a system of ropes and pulleys Náshdí had devised. By midday, the skeleton of the roof was taking shape, a significant milestone in their progress. The structure was now recognizably a church, though still open to the sky. As they ate a simple lunch of cornbread and jerky, a small group of riders appeared on the road. Sarah tensed, but Náshdí touched her arm reassuringly. Not town people, he said, my people. 3 Apache men approached cautiously, their expressions guarded. They spoke rapidly to Náshdí in their language, occasionally glancing at Sarah. She remained still, sensing the importance of the exchange. Finally, Náshdí turned to her. These men from my band, come to tell news. Soldiers moving near reservation, taking water sources. His face showed rare anger. Push people into smaller area. No good water there. That's horrible, Sarah said. Is there anything we can do? Náshdí translated her question, prompting surprised looks from the men. One spoke at length, gesturing toward the distant mountains. He say many children sick. Náshdí translated. Need medicine white people have, clean water. Sarah thought quickly. Thomas might help. He has medicines in his store, and I know where good water is. She gestured toward the hidden spring Náshdí had shown her. Náshdí conferred with the men again.
Their conversation grew animated, with occasional sharp words that sounded like disagreement. Finally, the men nodded reluctantly and returned to their horses. They go back, Náshdí explained. Tell others about spring. Maybe bring women, children here for water. They're welcome, Sarah assured him. And I'll speak to Thomas about medicines. After the men departed, Náshdí seemed troubled. Dangerous time coming. Your people, my people, both angry, afraid. What can we do? Sarah asked. In answer, Náshdí led her to the center of the church, where they had created the blessing circle weeks earlier. He knelt, motioning for her to join him. Old ones teach rain-calling ceremony, he said. Many days, many prayers. I show you. He began to sing softly, a low, rhythmic chant that seemed to rise from the earth itself. His hands moved in precise patterns, sometimes reaching toward the sky, sometimes pressing against the ground. When the song ended, he produced a small clay whistle shaped like a bird, and blew 4 notes to the 4 directions. Now you, he said, offering her the whistle. Sarah hesitated. I don't know your prayers. Use your prayers. Same Creator hears. Feeling self-conscious but committed, Sarah began to recite the Lord's Prayer. As she spoke, Náshdí's soft drumming accompanied her words, somehow making them feel more powerful, more connected to the earth beneath them. When she finished, he nodded approvingly. Good beginning. Many days needed. We'll pray each day, Sarah promised, in both our ways. That evening, as Sarah prepared to return home, Náshdí gave her a small version of his cracked earth painting. Keep this, he instructed. Reminder of balance needed. As she drove her wagon home, Sarah noticed for the first time in months, a faint line of clouds gathering on the western horizon. Perhaps it meant nothing. Perhaps it was a sign. That night, she dreamed of rain falling on the church roof, the drops forming patterns like the lightning crack in Náshdí's painting, washing away the divisions between peoples, between beliefs, between hearts. The charred timber lay across the church threshold like a fallen soldier. Sarah stood frozen, taking in the destruction before her. Someone had come in the night, piling brush around the eastern wall and setting it alight. The fire had claimed one corner of the structure before dying out, whether from lack,
The fuel, or the perpetrator's change of heart. She couldn't tell. No, she whispered, the single word carrying the weight of her dismay. Weeks of work, of struggle, of hope, marred by hatred she couldn't comprehend. The acrid smell of smoke still hung in the air as she moved through the damaged section. Most of the structure remained intact, but the corner post and several connecting beams were badly charred. The wall would need to be rebuilt. Tears of frustration burned her eyes. She knelt among the ashes, hands blackening as she lifted a piece of scorched wood. This was more than vandalism. It was a message. Stop, or next time the entire church would burn. She didn't hear Náshdí's approach. He simply appeared beside her, his face grave as he surveyed the damage. He asked quietly. I don't know, Sarah replied, rising to her feet. I found it like this when I arrived. Náshdí examined the burn pattern, circling the damaged area with careful attention. Started here, he said, pointing to where the fire had clearly been set. Not accident. No, Sarah agreed bitterly. Not an accident. They stood in silence, the magnitude of the violation settling over them. This place that had become sacred to them both, where they had prayed in their different ways to the same Creator, had been desecrated by hate. We should report this to the sheriff, Sarah said finally, though she had little hope of justice. Náshdí's expression remained impassive, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Sheriff, do nothing. You know this. He was right. The local sheriff rarely involved himself in matters concerning property outside town limits, especially when Indians might be involved, though in this case, as the victim rather than the perpetrator. What do we do? Sarah asked, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. Rebuild? Move the church elsewhere? Give up? Náshdí studied her face. What your heart say? Sarah looked at the charred timber again. Her first impulse had been despair, but now with Náshdí beside her, something else kindled within, not hatred for those who had done this, but a fiercer determination. My heart says we rebuild, she declared. Stronger than before, Náshdí nodded, approval warming his features. Then we rebuild. He knelt to examine the charred beam more closely. Not all bad. Fire only take outside. Inside wood still strong. He ran his hand along the blackened surface, his expression thoughtful. Then to Sarah's surprise he smiled. In my people's stories, he said, fire both destroys and makes new. Burns forests so new plants grow. This beam fire touch makes special, sacred, 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 sacred. Sarah echoed skeptically. It's ruined, not ruined, transformed. Náshdí stood, dusting ash from his hands. We keep this beam, make center of new wall. Show fire cannot stop what Creator once built. The concept struck Sarah as profoundly meaningful. What others intended for destruction could be incorporated into something stronger, a visible testament to perseverance. Yes, she decided, we'll use it, right where everyone can see it. They set to work clearing the debris, salvaging what could be reused. Sarah found herself watching Náshdí, his methodical movements, his calm acceptance of this setback. Where she had initially felt despair, his presence gave her courage. Why you smile? He asked, catching her gaze. I was thinking that without you, I might have given up today. Náshdí shook his head. No, you stubborn woman, not give up. Sarah laughed despite everything. Perhaps, but it's easier not to give up when you're not alone. A comfortable silence fell between them as they worked. By midday they had cleared away the damaged materials and were preparing to rebuild the affected wall. Sarah was measuring a replacement beam when the sound of an approaching wagon caught their attention. Marshal Jenkins pulled his team to a stop at the edge of the property. He sat for a moment, observing their work, then climbed down and approached slowly. I heard about the fire, he said, without preamble. Figured you'd be out here picking up the pieces. Sarah straightened, wary of his presence. Did you come to survey your handiwork, Mr. Jenkins? Jenkins' face darkened. I didn't do this, Mrs. Caldwell, and I resent the implication. I may not approve of your associations, but I don't burn down houses of worship. Náshdí had moved to Sarah's side, his stance protective though not overtly threatening. Jenkins eyed him with undisguised distrust before turning back to Sarah. Some of the younger men in town were drinking heavily last night, bragging about teaching lessons. I came to tell you I've spoken to the sheriff. Not that he's likely to do much. Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face. Don't misunderstand me, Jenkins continued. I still think you're making a dangerous mistake. But this, he gestured to the burned section. This crosses a line. Church burning sits poorly with God-fearing folk. I appreciate your concern, Sarah said carefully, though I'm surprised by it. Jenkins shrugged uncomfortably. My quarrel is with him and his kind. He nodded toward Náshdí. Not with you, and certainly not with a church, whatever misguided purpose you have for it. He returned to his wagon and retrieved something from the back, a length of milled lumber. Thought you might need this. Found it at my place. No use for it currently. He placed the beam on the ground near them. Consider it a Christian duty, nothing more. As he climbed back onto his wagon, he paused. A word of advice, Mrs. Caldwell. There's talk of militia forming. If the Apache raids continue north of here, you'd do well to distance yourself from certain associations before that happens. After Jenkins departed, Sarah and Náshdí exchanged puzzled looks. Complicated man, Náshdí observed, speaks with forked tongue, but brings gift. Perhaps not all hearts are fully hardened, Sarah mused, examining the donated lumber. Or perhaps he genuinely believes he's saving my soul, or covering guilt. Náshdí suggested. Sarah considered this. Either way, we have more materials to rebuild. Let's use them. As they worked to incorporate the charred timber into the new wall design, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace. The attempted destruction had somehow cemented her resolve. This church would stand, not as a monument to what was lost, but as a testament to what could be built from the ashes of hatred. The tapestry took shape beneath Sarah's fingers, a rectangle of rough-spun cotton, where she'd begun weaving designs that merged the geometric patterns she'd learned from her mother with symbols Náshdí had drawn for her. European crosses intersected with Apache sun signs. Biblical imagery of doves and fish flowed into stylized eagles and mountain symbols. She worked on it in the evenings, a way to rest her body while keeping her hands productive. Two-world design, Náshdí observed, watching her add threads of indigo blue, obtained from Thomas's store. Like church, like us, the church now had 4 complete walls and a partially finished roof. The charred beam had been prominently incorporated into the eastern wall, its blackened surface contrasting with the fresh lumber around it. From the road it was clearly visible, a reminder of what had been overcome. I thought it could hang inside when we're finished, Sarah explained, holding up the tapestry. Something to remind people that beauty can come from different traditions joining together. Náshdí nodded approvingly. Good medicine. Church needs spirit inside, not just walls. They had fallen into a comfortable rhythm of work and conversation. As the structure neared completion, their discussions turned increasingly to what would happen afterward. Neither spoke directly of their growing feelings, yet an unacknowledged current ran between them, deepening with each passing day. My people ask about church, Náshdí said, as they worked on fitting wooden shingles to the roof. Some want to see. Sarah looked up in surprise. They want to visit the church. Curious. Hear stories about woman and Apache building white man's church. He secured another shingle in place. I tell them come tomorrow. Is good? Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. Of course, they're welcome. The next day Sarah arrived earlier than usual, taking extra care with her appearance. She had baked cornbread and brought coffee, unsure what hospitality might be appropriate, but wanting to offer something. Mid-morning, Náshdí appeared with 4 others, 2 elderly men and 2 women of varying ages. They approached cautiously, their expressions a mixture of wariness and curiosity. Náshdí introduced them in halting English. The eldest was Grey Wolf, a tribal elder with deeply lined face and alert eyes that missed nothing. Beside him stood his wife Willow, her silver-streaked hair braided with colored threads. The younger woman was Morning Sky, a relative of Náshdí's late wife. The fourth was Stone Path, a middle-aged man with a severe countenance who hung back from the others. The introductions were formal, each visitor nodding solemnly as their name was spoken. Sarah welcomed them, feeling suddenly self-conscious about her limited knowledge of Apache customs. Grey Wolf circled the church slowly, running gnarled fingers over the construction. He paused at the charred beam, exchanging words with Náshdí in their language. He asked if white people try to stop building. Náshdí translated. Yes, Sarah admitted. Some did. Grey Wolf studied her face before speaking again. He say you have strong heart. Like Apache woman. Náshdí's lips curved slightly. High praise. Willow approached Sarah, gesturing to the 2-world tapestry hanging temporarily over a window opening. Her weathered hands touched the weaving, tracing the patterns with obvious appreciation. She weaver too, Náshdí explained. Say your design good, but technique. He searched for the word. Need teaching. Sarah laughed. I would welcome her instruction. This exchange seemed to break the ice. Morning Sky brought forward a small bundle, dried herbs and berries wrapped in deerskin. For cooking, Náshdí translated. Flavors from desert plants. She say help through winter. Only Stone Path remained aloof, his eyes constantly moving between the church and the road to town, as if expecting trouble.
When Sarah approached him with offered cornbread, he accepted with stiff formality, but did not eat. He not trust, Náshdí explained quietly. Lost brother to white soldiers, needs time. The visit evolved into an unexpected cultural exchange. Through Náshdí's translation, Sarah learned about traditional Apache building methods, how they constructed wickiups designed to stay cool in summer and warm in winter. In turn, she explained the significance of church architecture, the steeple pointing heavenward, the altar oriented east. Grey Wolf spoke at length, his hands gesturing expressively. He say church building strong, Náshdí translated. Good bones, will stand against wind. But, he hesitated. He asked why God needs house. Creator everywhere in Apache, in mountains, in springs, in sky. Sarah considered her answer carefully. I believe God is everywhere too. The church isn't to contain God, but to remind people to look for him. It's a gathering place where we can worship together. When Náshdí translated, Grey Wolf nodded thoughtfully. He spoke again, his voice gaining strength. He say, Apache people need gathering place too. Place away from white eyes watching on reservation. Safe place. Náshdí looked directly at Sarah. He asked if church could be such place sometimes. The request took Sarah by surprise, though in retrospect, it seemed a natural extension of what the church had become. Of course, she said without hesitation. That's exactly what I hope this church will be, a place for all people to gather in peace. When translated, her words prompted smiles from Willow and Morning Sky. Even Stone Path's severe expression softened slightly. Grey Wolf reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew a handful of blue-white stones. He pressed them into Sarah's palm. Turquoise, Náshdí explained. Sacred stone. He say put in church foundation. Connect building to earth, to ancestors. Sarah was deeply moved by the gesture.
We need to move everyone to somewhere safer before dawn. Where? He asked simply. It was the question that had been haunting her. The surrounding hills offered few hiding places unknown to local scouts. Her own homestead would be the first place searched. I don't know yet, she admitted. As the refugees settled, Sarah noticed Morning Sky watching her closely. The young woman approached, her infant sleeping against her chest. You care for Náshdí, she said softly, her English better than Stone Path's. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Yes, Morning Sky studied her face. He changed after losing family, became shadow walker, alone always, now different again. Because of you, because of this. She gestured to the church around them. Before Sarah could respond, a low whistle came from outside, Náshdí's signal. Relief flooded through her as she moved to the door, but the sight that greeted her froze her in place. Náshdí was not alone. Behind him stood Grey Wolf and 6 Apache warriors, their faces painted for battle. They carried a mixture of traditional weapons and rifles, and their expressions were grim. What's happening? Sarah asked as Náshdí approached. Soldiers find Upper Canyon, he reported. Some of our people captured. Others escaped, scattered. His eyes were dark with anger and concern. More soldiers coming tomorrow. Bigger search. Grey Wolf spoke rapidly in Apache. Náshdí translated. He says warriors will defend their people, fight if necessary. Fight here? Sarah asked in alarm. This is supposed to be a sanctuary, not a battleground. Náshdí shook his head. Not here. Draw soldiers away from church. Give women, children time to escape. That's suicide, Sarah protested. Grey Wolf spoke again, his weathered face proud despite the desperate circumstances. He says better to die standing than live on knees, Náshdí translated. Old Apache way. Sarah looked between them, desperation mounting. There must be another way. A distant rumble interrupted them. Not horses or gunfire, but thunder. All eyes turned to the western horizon, where lightning now flickered among the storm clouds that had been gathering all day. Rain coming, Náshdí observed, his expression changing. First big rain since spring. Sarah felt the wind strengthening, carrying the scent of moisture, a precious rarity in the drought-stricken land. The weather vane spun faster, the eagle's wings catching moonlight as they turned. The rain ceremony, she whispered. Our prayers. Grey Wolf spoke rapidly to Náshdí, gesturing toward the storm clouds. The other warriors joined the conversation, their tone urgent. What are they saying? Sarah asked. They see sign, Náshdí explained. Rain coming when most needed. Maybe Creator sends storm to help his children. Hope flickered within Sarah. The storm could cover your people's escape. The rain will wash away tracks, make it harder for the soldiers to follow. Náshdí nodded, already thinking ahead. Need safe place beyond storm. Place soldiers not look. An idea formed in Sarah's mind. Dangerous, perhaps foolish, but potentially their only option. The abandoned silver mine in Black Rock Canyon. Robert showed it to me once. It's flooded in the lower levels, so the mining company left, but the upper tunnels are dry and large enough to shelter everyone. How far? 3 hours by wagon. Less on horseback if you know the direct route through the hills. Náshdí conferred with Grey Wolf and the warriors. Rapid discussion followed, with occasional glances toward Sarah. Finally Náshdí turned back to her. They agree. Good plan. But dangerous journey in storm with children. Elders. More dangerous to stay here, Sarah countered. Or to fight. Grey Wolf approached Sarah directly. He spoke at length, his eyes holding hers with intensity. He says you risk much to help our people. Náshdí translated. Ask why white woman stands against her own kind. Sarah considered her answer carefully. Tell him I'm not standing against anyone. I'm standing for what I believe, that all people deserve sanctuary and compassion. The church we built is meant to bring people together, not divide them. When Náshdí translated, Grey Wolf studied her face for a long moment. Then he reached out weathered hands and placed them on Sarah's shoulders, a gesture of respect and blessing. The old chief spoke again, more softly. He says your spirit shines like morning star. Náshdí translated, his own voice carrying a note of pride. Guides people through dark night. As if punctuating Grey Wolf's words, lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. The storm was almost upon them. The church bell rang out across the valley for the first time, its clear tone carrying through the rain-heavy air. Sarah had salvaged it from an abandoned mission near the Mexican border, and Náshdí had helped her mount it just days earlier. Now Stone Path pulled its rope with measured strokes, sending its call into the storm-darkened morning. Why ring bell? Náshdí asked, helping Sarah load the last of the supplies into her wagon. To call people to worship, Sarah explained. Today it calls your people to safety, and perhaps serves another purpose. The storm had arrived with biblical fury, lightning splitting the sky, thunder rolling across the hills, and rain falling in blinding sheets. It was both blessing and challenge. The downpour would obscure their movements and wash away tracks, but also made travel treacherous, especially for the elderly and young children. Grey Wolf and his warriors had departed an hour earlier, moving east to create a diversion that would draw soldiers away from the refugees' escape route. The remaining Apache, mostly women, children and elders, were gathered in the church, preparing for the journey to the abandoned mine. Bell will bring townspeople, Stone Path warned, returning from his task. That's what I'm counting on, Sarah replied. Reverend Parker, Thomas, maybe others, people who might help us, or at least bear witness. It was a gamble. The bell would indeed draw attention, not just potential allies, but perhaps Jenkins and his deputies as well. But Sarah had realized they couldn't simply disappear. Questions would be asked, searches conducted. Better to control the narrative from the beginning. The church door opened, and Morning Sky emerged with her infant bundled against the rain. All ready, she reported. But old grandmother cannot walk far. Too weak. Sarah nodded. She'll ride in my wagon with the smallest children. The rain intensified as they prepared to depart, water streaming from the church roof in curtains. Sarah took a final look at the building that had begun as Robert's dream, transformed through her labor and Náshdí's partnership, and now served a purpose none of them could have foreseen. It will stand, Náshdí said, noting her gaze. We built strong. The sound of approaching horses brought everyone to alert. Stone Path knocked an arrow in his bow, while the other Apache men raised what weapons they had. Náshdí stepped forward to stand beside Sarah in the church doorway, presenting a unified front to whoever approached. Through the rain emerged not the expected soldiers, but Thomas, Reverend Parker, and to Sarah's surprise, 3 women from town, the shopkeeper's wife, the school teacher, and elderly Mrs. Abernathy, who had lost 2 sons in Apache conflicts years earlier. The bell, Reverend Parker called over the storm. We heard it and thought. He broke off, taking in the scene before him, the Apache refugees, the loaded wagon, Sarah and Náshdí standing together. What's happening here, Sarah? Thomas asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. Sarah stepped forward into the rain. These people need help. The army is rounding up all Apache, peaceful or not. There are children, elders. This is aiding hostiles, the Reverend said, though without the condemnation Sarah had expected. The law, sometimes the law is wrong, Sarah interrupted. You know that, Reverend. Your own grandfather ran a station on the Underground Railroad. You told me that story yourself. Parker's expression shifted. Memories of his family's past moral stand, clearly weighing against present circumstances. Where are you taking them? He asked. Finally. Better you don't know, Sarah replied. In case you're questioned later. Mrs. Abernathy dismounted with difficulty, her aged joints protesting. She approached the church door, peering past Sarah at the frightened faces within. Her gaze lingered on a small boy clutching his mother's hand. My David was 7 when they killed him, she said quietly. About this one's age. Sarah held her breath, uncertain what would follow this painful recollection. The old woman turned to her. They killed my boy. Should I wish the same on their children? She shook her head slowly. What would that make me? To everyone's surprise, Mrs. Abernathy removed her heavy shawl and offered it to the Apache mother. The rain is cold. Keep him warm. The simple act of compassion broke something open. The school teacher stepped forward with her own contribution, a satchel of bread and cheese intended for her lunch. Thomas's wife began organizing the children into groups for the journey. Not everyone was convinced. Reverend Parker still frowned, his theological certainties warring with the human need before him. This isn't right, he muttered to Sarah. However well-intentioned. What would Jesus do, Reverend? Sarah challenged gently. Turn away the strangers seeking shelter. Ignore the children in need. Before he could answer, new hoofbeats approached. Many horses, moving fast despite the storm. Soldiers, Náshdí warned, his body tensing. And Jenkins, Thomas added, peering through the rain. With deputies. Sarah's heart raced. Their escape route was cut off. The Apache mothers gathered their children closer, fear evident on their faces. Inside, Reverend Parker ordered suddenly, his decision made. Everyone inside the church. Now, as the refugees retreated into the sanctuary, Parker turned to Sarah. Church asylum is an ancient tradition, not legally binding, but it might give us time to reason with them. Sarah took her place in the doorway, Náshdí beside her. Behind them the townspeople and Apache arranged themselves within the church, an unlikely congregation united by a moral choice. The riders arrived, 6 soldiers led by a lieutenant, with Jenkins and 3 deputies flanking them. They halted before the church, rain streaming from their hats and ponchos. Mrs. Caldwell, the lieutenant called. We have information that you're harboring hostile Apache. By order of the United States Army, I demand you turn them over immediately. There are no hostiles here, Lieutenant, Sarah replied steadily. Only women, children, and elders seeking sanctuary from the storm. Jenkins pushed his horse forward. Sarah, don't make this difficult. We know what you've been doing out here. It ends today. This is a house of God, Reverend Parker stated, stepping up beside Sarah. These people have claimed sanctuary within its walls. With all due respect, Reverend, church asylum isn't recognized by territorial law, the lieutenant responded. My orders are to round up all Apache not on the reservation, even children. Mrs. Abernathy called from within the church. Shame on you, Henry Jenkins. Would you tear babies from their mother's arms? The lieutenant looked uncomfortable, rain dripping from his uniform as he surveyed the standoff. Ma'am, I have my orders. Sometimes orders are wrong, Thomas said, joining the line at the door. Sometimes a man has to decide for himself what's right. The lieutenant dismounted, followed by Jenkins. The tension stretched taut as they approached the church steps, and then, as if in divine response, the heavens opened fully. Rain fell in a torrent that seemed biblical in proportion, turning the ground to instant mud, obscuring vision beyond a few yards, and with it came the sound of many horses approaching from the east. Grey Wolf and his warriors. Sarah thought at first, her heart sinking at the impending confrontation. But it wasn't the Apache who emerged from the downpour. The silver communion cup caught the flashes of lightning, its surface reflecting fractured images of those gathered within the church. Sarah had crafted it from a piece of silver Robert had once brought home, a small nugget found in a creek bed that she'd saved for something special. Now it bore engravings of both Christian symbols and Apache designs, a physical embodiment of the bridge they had built. Through the curtain of rain emerged not Grey Wolf's warriors, but Marshal Williams and a dozen riders from neighboring settlements. The marshal's expression was grim as he dismounted, water streaming from his oilskin coat. Jenkins, he called above the storm. Stand down. Jenkins turned in surprise. Marshal, what are you doing here? Preventing a mistake. The marshal approached the church steps, nodding respectfully to Sarah and the Reverend. Got word from Fort Grant. The raids north of here weren't Apache work. Army caught the real culprits yesterday. White rustlers using Indian arrows to cover their tracks. A murmur ran through both groups. The lieutenant stepped forward. I have more recent orders. The marshal interrupted, producing a rain-spattered document from inside his coat. Countermanding yours. No action against peaceful Apache until the situation is clarified. The lieutenant read the paper, his face betraying conflicting emotions, relief and frustration in equal measure. These orders are legitimate, he confirmed reluctantly. But my men have already collected several groups. They're being escorted to the reservation. Those are Grey Wolf's people, Náshdí said, stepping forward. We're taken. The lieutenant eyed him warily. South road toward Fort Grant. Náshdí exchanged glances with Stone Path, silent communication passing between them. Sarah knew they were calculating whether they could intercept the soldiers and free their people. Don't even think about it, Jenkins warned, reading their intent. That would be a genuine hostile act. The impasse might have escalated further, but nature intervened. A deafening crack of thunder directly overhead startled horses and humans alike. The downpour intensified impossibly, creating a roaring curtain of water that forced everyone to seek better shelter. The soldiers retreated to a stand of trees. Jenkins and his deputies huddled beneath a rocky overhang. Inside, all of you, Sarah called to the marshal and his men. The church was already crowded with refugees and townspeople, but they made room for the newcomers, common humanity trumping divisions as they sought escape from the deluge. Inside, an extraordinary scene unfolded. Apache mothers sat beside town women, children of both peoples huddled together for warmth. The Reverend stood near the simple altar, looking both troubled and inspired by his unexpected congregation. Marshal Williams conversed quietly with Grey Wolf, the old chief having returned during the confusion of the storm's peak.
Quite a gathering you've managed, Mrs. Caldwell, the marshal observed wryly to Sarah. Not exactly what folks expected when you started building this place, I'd wager. No, Sarah agreed, but perhaps exactly what was needed. The lieutenant entered last, removing his dripping hat with military precision. His gaze swept the interior, noting the mixed assembly with obvious discomfort. We'll wait out the worst of the storm, he announced, then continue our mission according to the modified orders. And what exactly are those orders now, Lieutenant? Reverend Parker asked. The officer's jaw tightened. To ensure all Apache return to their designated areas on the reservation, peacefully if possible. The reservation where there is no clean water, Náshdí countered. Where children sicken and elders die, that's not my concern, the lieutenant replied stiffly. I enforce policy. I don't make it. Then who does? Sarah challenged. Who decides that one people has less right to their homeland than another, less right to clean water and sufficient food? The lieutenant had no answer, but Jenkins spoke up from where he stood by the door. It's simple reality, Sarah. Progress comes at a price. The territory is changing. There's no place for wandering tribes in the modern world. There could be, Thomas interjected unexpectedly, if we chose to make one. An uneasy silence fell, punctuated by the drumming of rain on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. The storm showed no signs of abating, forcing this unlikely assembly to remain together in the confined space of the church. Sarah moved among them, offering water from a dipper, speaking quiet words of reassurance to frightened children of both communities. Náshdí did the same, his natural dignity and calm presence drawing reluctant respect, even from those who had previously viewed him with suspicion. When Sarah reached the altar, she found the silver communion cup she had crafted weeks earlier. On impulse she filled it with rainwater collected from a leak in the roof, pure life-giving water that belonged to no one and everyone. Water is life, she said, her voice carrying in the suddenly quieter space. In my faith it represents cleansing, rebirth, blessing. She looked to Náshdí. What does water mean to your people? Same, he replied, stepping forward. Water connects all life. Rain falls on all people, all creatures. Makes no difference between Apache, white man, Mexican. Sarah offered him the cup. He drank, then passed it to Grey Wolf, who after a moment's hesitation, also drank and passed it on. The cup made its way around the church, from Apache elder to town woman, from soldier to child, a spontaneous communion that transcended the formal rituals of any single faith. When the cup returned to Sarah, only Marshal Williams had declined to drink. He watched the proceedings with the measured assessment of a man who had seen much of human nature, both noble and base. A pretty gesture, he commented privately to Sarah, but it doesn't change the fundamental problems. Perhaps not, Sarah acknowledged, but it reminds us that we're capable of something better than fear and division. As the cup ceremony concluded, the rain began to slacken. The immediate crisis of the storm was passing, which meant decisions could no longer be delayed. The lieutenant conferred with his men, then approached the center of the church. We'll be moving out within the hour, he announced. All Apache are ordered to accompany us to the reservation. Grey Wolf rose to his feet, his weathered face dignified despite the circumstances. He spoke at length in his native tongue, Náshdí translating for the others. He says his people have harmed no settlers. They seek only to live in their traditional lands, with access to clean water and hunting grounds. He asks if there can be an agreement, a designated territory where they can live in peace, coming to trade at the settlement, but maintaining their own ways. The lieutenant looked uncomfortable. I don't have authority to make such arrangements. I might, Marshal Williams said unexpectedly. As territorial marshal, I have some discretion in how policies are implemented in remote areas. He studied Grey Wolf thoughtfully. It would require compromise on both sides, and guarantees of peaceful behavior. You can't seriously be considering this, Jenkins protested. These people are savages. They've killed, as have we, Mrs. Abernathy interrupted, her aged voice cutting through his bluster. My boys are dead because of fighting that both sides perpetuated. I don't want more mothers, white or Indian, to know that grief. The church fell silent again as her words sank in. Outside the rain had diminished to a gentle patter, and rays of sunlight began to pierce the clouds, the storm passing as suddenly as it had arrived. The church doorway framed the setting sun, its golden light illuminating the carved inscriptions in both English and Apache that Sarah and Náshdí had completed only days before. On the left side, words from Psalm 133, "How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity." On the right, the Apache blessing, "May you walk in beauty all around you." 3 months had passed since the confrontation during the great storm. The land still showed signs of that day's deluge, renewed grasses pushing through formerly parched earth, wild flowers dotting the hillsides, the creek running full and clear for the first time in over a year. Sarah sat on the church steps beside Náshdí, watching the sunset paint the valley in hues of amber and rose. Much had changed since that pivotal day when enemies had been forced to shelter together beneath the roof they'd built. Marshal Williams had proven true to his word. Using his authority and considerable persuasive skills, he had negotiated a fragile but holding peace. Grey Wolf's band was permitted to remain in their traditional canyon lands, provided they registered with the Indian agent and maintained peaceful relations with settlers. In return, they received legal protection and access to trading rights in redemption. The arrangement satisfied no one completely, but served everyone's essential needs, the hallmark of a successful compromise. It had required multiple meetings in the church, raised voices, threatened walkouts, and ultimately grudging respect between former adversaries. Thomas says the general store's trade has increased since your people started bringing crafts and herbs to sell, Sarah remarked, watching the last sliver of sun disappear behind the distant mountains. Náshdí nodded. Good for both peoples. Apache women earn what they need. Town people get medicines, baskets, better knowledge of land. The church had evolved as well, serving as both Christian worship space on Sundays and community gathering place throughout the week. Reverend Parker still conducted services, though his sermons had gradually shifted from strict doctrine to themes of brotherhood and acceptance. On alternate days, Grey Wolf sometimes led traditional ceremonies on the grounds outside, teaching younger generations the sacred ways of their ancestors. Your writing teacher comes tomorrow? Náshdí asked. Sarah smiled. Yes, Miss Henderson has agreed to teach reading and writing to anyone who wants to learn, townspeople and Apache alike. The school teacher had been among the first to embrace the new arrangement, arguing forcefully that education would benefit everyone. Not all changes had been smooth. Jenkins and several families had departed redemption in protest, unable to accept the new order. Others remained suspicious, watching for any sign of trouble that might justify returning to old hostilities. But with each passing week of peaceful coexistence, such concerns diminished. I have something for you, Náshdí said, reaching into the pouch at his waist. He withdrew a small object wrapped in soft deerskin. Made this. Sarah unwrapped the gift to find a delicately carved wooden ring. The band was fashioned from the same pine they had used for the church altar, inlaid with tiny pieces of turquoise. It's beautiful, she said softly, understanding its significance. Among my people, Náshdí explained, when man and woman build dwelling together, they become family. We built more than dwelling. He gestured to the church, built new way of living. Sarah held the ring, emotion tightening her throat. Her feelings for Náshdí had only deepened through their shared struggles and triumphs. Yet the world still placed barriers between them that neither could ignore. There would be consequences, she said, voicing the reality they both understood. For both of us, always consequences for choosing new path, Náshdí replied,
Question is whether path worth walking. He took her hand gently. Not ask you decide now, only know this possible. Two rivers can join, become stronger together. Sarah slipped the ring onto her finger, allowing herself to imagine a future that months ago would have seemed impossible. I've been thinking about Robert, she said, about what he wanted when we came here, to build something that would bring people together in faith. I think he would understand this. Náshdí nodded. Your husband was builder. You finish his work, but also build new work. This good honor to his memory. From inside the church came the sounds of activity, final preparations for tomorrow's gathering where representatives from neighboring settlements would join them to observe the tentative peace. What had begun as Sarah's solitary mission had expanded beyond anything she could have envisioned. Whatever happens between us, Sarah said, I'm grateful for what we've built together. Náshdí's eyes held hers with characteristic steadiness. Some say world changing too fast, old ways dying, may be true, but new ways being born too. He gestured toward the valley where lights from both town and Apache encampments twinkled in the gathering dusk. Maybe we help birth better way. As darkness settled over the land, they remained on the church steps, their shoulders touching lightly. No promises had been made beyond continuing the path they'd started, yet in that simple proximity was a profound statement. Two people from worlds divided by blood and history, choosing to sit together in the gathering darkness, looking toward a shared dawn. The church stood solid behind them, its weathered walls containing the stories of all who had sheltered within it, stories of conflict and compassion, of fear overcome by courage, of strangers becoming allies. The bell in its small tower remained silent this evening, but would ring again tomorrow, calling all who would hear to gather beneath its roof. Years later, when travelers passed through the territory, they would remark upon the unusual settlement where Apache and white inhabitants conducted trade, shared resources, and gathered in a church whose doorway bore inscriptions in 2 languages. Few knew the full story of the widow who had built it with her bare hands and the Apache warrior who had seen her power, but all who entered felt something special in that sacred space, an echo of the determination, struggle, and ultimately love that had raised its walls. And always the weather vane turned with changing winds, the cross and eagle's wings catching sunlight, a constant reminder that the most enduring structures are those built to embrace both heaven and earth, both tradition and transformation.